Hashtag Have Gun will travel, Season 6, Episode 1. Genesis, detailed summary. The sixth season of Have Gun will travel opens with Genesis, an episode that immediately reminds viewers why the series became one of the most respected Western dramas of its era. Unlike many traditional Westerns that focus exclusively on gunfights, outlaws, and territorial disputes, this episode explores themes of identity, morality, survival, and the possibility of starting over after tragedy. At the center of the story is Paladin, the sophisticated gunfighter for hire whose intelligence often proves more powerful than his famous revolver. Dressed in black and carrying a calling card that simply reads, "Have Gun, will travel," Paladin once again finds himself traveling into unfamiliar territory, where violence is only one part of a much larger human struggle. The episode begins with Paladin leaving behind the relative comfort of civilization and traveling toward a remote region where rumors of conflict have begun circulating. Like many of his assignments, the details are initially unclear. The frontier is a place where information travels slowly, stories become exaggerated, and truth is often hidden beneath fear and speculation. Paladin understands this better than most people. Years of traveling across the American West have taught him that appearances can be deceptive. The people who seem dangerous are not always guilty, and the people who present themselves as victims are not always innocent. As he makes his way across the isolated landscape, the audience is reminded of one of the most important characteristics that separates Paladin from many other Western heroes. He is neither a lawman nor an outlaw. He works independently, guided by a personal code of honor rather than by official authority. This gives him a unique perspective. He is free to evaluate each situation according to his own principles rather than simply enforcing rules created by others. The title, Genesis, immediately suggests a story about beginnings. The word traditionally refers to creation, origins, and the start of something entirely new. This theme becomes increasingly important as the episode unfolds. The frontier itself represents constant creation. New towns emerge from empty landscapes. Families attempt to establish new homes. Former criminals seek redemption. Immigrants arrive hoping to escape difficult pasts. Everyone, in one way or another, is searching for a fresh beginning. When Paladin arrives at his destination, he discovers a community struggling to define itself. The people living there are caught between survival and progress. Resources are limited, trust is fragile, and the future remains uncertain. Every decision carries significant consequences because one mistake can threaten everything they have built. The people Paladin encounters reflect different attitudes toward change. Some believe the only way to survive is through strength and force. Others believe cooperation offers a better path forward. These competing philosophies create tension throughout the episode and force Paladin to navigate a complicated social environment rather than a simple conflict between heroes and villains. One of the episode's greatest strengths is its refusal to rely on stereotypes. The characters are not presented as entirely good or entirely evil. Instead, they behave like real people shaped by difficult circumstances. Fear influences their decisions. Pride prevents them from admitting mistakes. Hope encourages them to continue even when failure seems inevitable. Paladin quickly realizes that the conflict he has entered cannot be solved simply by drawing his weapon. Violence remains a possibility, but it would only treat the symptoms rather than the underlying problem. Instead, he begins observing the people around him, carefully listening to their stories and trying to understand what truly motivates them. His approach reflects one of the defining qualities of the series. Paladin is highly educated and deeply thoughtful. He often relies on psychology, philosophy, and diplomacy before considering physical confrontation. He understands that human behavior is rarely random. People act according to their experiences, fears, ambitions, and desires. As he spends more time with the community, Paladin discovers that many of the residents are carrying emotional burdens connected to their pasts. Some have experienced loss. Others are haunted by regret. Several individuals are attempting to reinvent themselves, hoping to leave behind previous identities and begin new lives. This is where the title gains additional significance. Genesis is not merely about the creation of a settlement or the establishment of a new community. It is about personal rebirth. The episode asks whether people can truly leave their past behind or whether old mistakes continue influencing their futures regardless of how far they travel. Paladin becomes especially interested in one particular individual whose circumstances reflect this larger question. The character represents the possibility of transformation while simultaneously illustrating how difficult genuine change can be. The frontier offers opportunities unavailable in more established societies, but it also creates new challenges. Reinventing oneself requires more than changing locations. It requires confronting old habits, accepting responsibility, and making different choices. As the story progresses, relationships within the community become increasingly strained. Misunderstandings create suspicion. Small disagreements develop into larger conflicts. Long-standing resentments begin surfacing. Paladin recognizes that many of these problems originate not from actual hostility, but from a failure to communicate honestly. Communication has always been one of Paladin's greatest weapons. Unlike many Western protagonists, he rarely relies on intimidation alone. He asks questions, encourages dialogue, and carefully examines the motivations behind people's actions. This method allows him to uncover truths that would remain hidden if he approached every situation as a simple confrontation. The physical environment also plays an important role throughout the episode. The landscape is both beautiful and unforgiving. Mountains, open plains, and isolated settlements emphasize the loneliness of frontier life. Nature constantly reminds the characters that survival is never guaranteed. Human conflicts may seem important, but the wilderness remains indifferent to personal ambitions. The setting also reinforces another important theme: isolation. Many of the characters feel disconnected not only from society, but also from one another. They live together physically while remaining emotionally separated. Paladin serves as an outsider who temporarily enters their world and encourages them to see one another differently. As tensions rise, the possibility of violence becomes increasingly likely. Some individuals become convinced that force is the only solution. Others desperately search for alternatives. Paladin finds himself walking a dangerous line between competing groups, attempting to prevent a situation from escalating beyond control. One of the episode's most compelling aspects is its examination of leadership. Who should guide a developing community? Should leadership belong to the strongest individual, the most experienced, the wealthiest? Or should authority come from trust and cooperation? Different characters provide different answers. Some favor dominance. Others support compromise. Paladin's perspective suggests that effective leadership requires wisdom rather than brute strength. He understands that authority achieved through fear rarely lasts. At the same time, the episode refuses to present idealistic solutions. Cooperation sounds appealing in theory, but survival on the frontier often requires difficult choices. Resources are limited, and people sometimes act selfishly because they genuinely fear losing everything. Paladin's presence gradually influences the community. Rather than imposing his own vision, he encourages people to examine their assumptions. He challenges their fears, exposes contradictions, and forces them to reconsider decisions made in anger. This approach reveals another important aspect of his character. Although Paladin is highly capable in combat, he rarely seeks recognition. He is not interested in becoming a permanent leader or establishing political control. He prefers to solve problems and continue traveling. His independence gives him remarkable freedom, but also creates emotional distance. Throughout the series, Paladin frequently witnesses other people creating families, building communities, and establishing roots while he continues moving from one assignment to another. This contrast subtly raises questions about his own life. Does Paladin envy those who settle down? Does he secretly wish for a more permanent existence? The episode does not provide direct answers, but these questions remain present beneath the surface. As events continue unfolding, hidden truths begin emerging. Characters reveal information they previously concealed. Motivations become clearer. People who initially seemed trustworthy display unexpected flaws, while others reveal surprising courage. The episode demonstrates that personal identity is often more complicated than labels suggest. A person's past does not always determine their future, but neither can it be completely erased. Growth requires acknowledging previous mistakes rather than pretending they never happened. This message is particularly powerful because the American frontier has traditionally been associated with reinvention. Many people traveled west believing they could leave behind failed relationships, financial troubles, criminal histories, or personal disappointments. Genesis questions whether physical movement alone is sufficient to create meaningful transformation. Paladin ultimately recognizes that the community's greatest challenge is not external danger, but internal division. People cannot build a future while remaining trapped by fear and resentment. The settlement's survival depends on trust, mutual respect, and a willingness to move forward together. As the climax approaches, tensions reach their highest point. Decisions that have been delayed can no longer be avoided. Several characters are forced to choose between revenge and reconciliation, between protecting their pride and protecting their future. Paladin's role during these critical moments demonstrates why he remains such a compelling protagonist. He does not simply react to events. He actively shapes them through observation, intelligence, and moral conviction. Violence, when it finally appears, serves a dramatic purpose rather than functioning as mere entertainment. The episode never glorifies conflict. Instead, it emphasizes the consequences that follow when people allow fear and anger to dictate their behavior. One particularly effective element of the story is its pacing. Rather than rushing toward an action-filled conclusion, the episode allows relationships to develop naturally. Conversations become just as important as confrontations. Emotional conflicts receive as much attention as physical ones. This storytelling approach distinguishes Have Gun Will Travel from many other Western television programs of the same era. The series consistently treats its audience as intellectually capable, presenting complex moral situations instead of simplistic adventures. The supporting cast contributes significantly to the episode's emotional impact. Each character represents a different response to hardship. Some become defensive, others become hopeful, some seek control, while others search for acceptance. These contrasting perspectives create a rich narrative environment in which no single solution satisfies everyone. Paladin may help guide events, but the community itself must ultimately determine its future. As the episode approaches its conclusion, the meaning of Genesis becomes fully apparent. Creation is not a single event. It is an ongoing process. Communities are not built overnight. Personal transformation does not happen instantly. New beginnings require patience, sacrifice, and the courage to accept uncertainty. Paladin's influence helps several characters recognize that they cannot continue defining themselves through past failures. However, he also reminds them that genuine change requires responsibility. A new beginning is meaningful only if people are willing to learn from previous mistakes. The episode ends on a thoughtful rather than triumphant note. Problems are addressed, but life remains uncertain. The frontier continues expanding. New challenges await. The community has taken an important step forward, but its future remains unwritten. Paladin prepares to continue his journey, reinforcing one of the series' central ideas. He is a temporary presence in the lives of the people he helps. He arrives, influences events, and moves on, leaving others to continue the work of building their own futures. There is something both admirable and melancholic about this role. Paladin rarely stays long enough to enjoy the stability he helps create. He remains a traveler, constantly moving between worlds and witnessing countless stories of human struggle and resilience. Genesis serves as an excellent opening to the sixth season because it captures everything that makes Have Gun Will Travel unique. The episode combines Western adventure with philosophical reflection, balancing action with meaningful character development. Rather than focusing exclusively on gunfights or frontier spectacle, the story explores universal questions about identity, redemption, leadership, and personal growth. Can people truly begin again? Can communities overcome division? Is the past a prison, or can it become the foundation for something better? Paladin does not provide simple answers. Instead, he encourages both the characters and the audience to think more deeply about these questions. Ultimately, Genesis is a story about hope. It acknowledges that life is filled with mistakes, disappointments, and conflicts, but it also suggests that renewal remains possible. New beginnings require courage because they force people to leave behind familiar patterns and embrace uncertainty. For Paladin, the journey continues. Another town, another conflict, and another opportunity to help people confront their fears await him somewhere beyond the horizon. Yet the lessons of Genesis remain. The frontier may be a harsh and unforgiving place, but it also offers something precious, the possibility of starting over. That possibility, more than guns or violence, defines the heart of the episode. It transforms Genesis from a conventional Western into a thoughtful meditation on what it means to rebuild a life after hardship. Through Paladin's calm wisdom and the struggles of the people he encounters, the episode reminds viewers that every ending contains the potential for a new beginning and that true creation begins not with a place, but with a decision to change.